Welcome to Highwood Studios. In particular, Warner Brothers Studios have brought you this video. Hope you all are enjoying your break. I know Mr. Welch and I have seen some of you at football practice. Some of you have seen the warm weather. Glad you're back talking AP US history with us. So, leaving off from last week, with our shortened week, we started talking about the Whigs and the Democrats, and how the political landscape of the United States has been changing. So we are going to leave off from there, and then we're going to start a conversation about slavery, and how our lecture on slavery is going to be incorporated in your Stacy and Tyler assignment. So briefly recapping what we left off with last week, corrupt bargain. Corrupt bargain is another name for the election of 1824. In this election, Andrew Jackson had the most votes. He had 99 electoral votes, but he did not win the presidency. According to the 12th Amendment, the candidate with the majority of votes is selected as president. And 99 was not a majority. It was not 51%. So, by rule of the 12th Amendment, the presidency would go to the House of Representatives. In this case, Henry Clay, very influential representative in the House, got support from his allies to vote for John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was a Federalist, shared a lot of ideas from Clay. Clay understood he wasn't going to win, so if you're not going to win, put your friend into office. And that's what he did. Followers of Andrew Jackson, as you can guess, were pretty upset. The guy with the most votes didn't win, hence we have the corrupt bargain. Now, this guy, he's pure joy. Quincy Adams, look at that face. Happy guy, happy to be alive. Son of John Adams. He was also a Federalist. He is the embodiment of the Federalist Party and ideas. Look at all the different parties that he joined. At first, outright Federalist like his father, rich elite from the East Coast. Then he became a Democrat-Republican, just like everybody else in 1820 and 1824. That was the winning party. If you wanted to win an election, you're part of this organization. Yet, he still had Federalist ideals. Afterwards, we're going to see how the Democrat-Republican Party changes. He becomes a Whig, which in itself is a Federalist Party. That is why he is the embodiment of the Federalists themselves. Lastly, this election was very important. Not only was it the corrupt bargain, it was also the end of King Caucus. Caucus refers to the way how the candidates back then received a nomination from the party. King Caucus said that people in the federal legislature would select their nomination for the party. 1824, that changed. We see a lot more people voting. Now, people are elected by their state legislators. So think about Cheri Bustos. Think about Bruce Rauner in the state of Illinois. Those people are part of our state legislators. Those people elected the candidates to the election of 1824. So that is why we see 4 different candidates in this election, each from different states: Tennessee, Massachusetts, Georgia, and Kentucky. End of King Caucus. Rise of the common man and their vote. Moving on. Adams' presidency supported the American system, which hopefully, maybe you don't remember from over break, but the American system was a huge Federalist idea. They supported government's revenues to go and support and build transportation systems like canals, railroads. They also supported tariffs to protect American businesses. They wanted a large national bank. Adams was on board. And like I said before, one of the reasons why he won is because someone like Clay and him were on the same page. He was considered an expert statesman. He was Secretary of State. While he was Secretary of State, he helped sign the Adams-Onis Treaty. Please write that down. Adams-Onis Treaty. O-N-I-S. That's a treaty that we signed with the Spanish that gave us Florida and parts of the Southwest. Okay? Also, as you can see, Henry Clay was his Secretary of State, and as we talked about before fall break, that this was a stepping stone to the presidency. Like I've told my students, Clay, he's a perennial loser. Even though he is a stepping stone to the presidency, he is never able to reach this pinnacle. What I want you to do, I want all of you to rank President Adams. If you're not sure what this means, remember back to our old lecture, rank him from Federalist to Anti-Federalist. Federalist being he supports a very strong federal government. A 10 would be that he supports a completely state-right government. So please do that on your own. I think this one is kind of an obvious answer. He's going to lean towards the lower numbers, in my opinion. Andrew Jackson. Very important. Okay? Now, one little thing to discuss before Andrew Jackson. This was on your reading quiz. It was something called the Dorr Rebellion in 1820. This was in Rhode Island. At the time, there were a few states that did not allow men to vote if you did not have property. If you did not own land, you cannot vote. So in Rhode Island, this guy named Dorr, who was a lawyer, drew up a constitution that allowed every white male to vote. He proposed it to the legislator. It was shot down. He had a couple of his buddies to pick up some guns. Small rebellion that failed. Why am I bringing this up? It's because this is the era of the common man. Andrew Jackson, largely his supporters came from average people. He is not a career politician. He got his background, or started his background in the military. Very successful in the War of 1812. In 1800, electors of Electoral College were selected by state legislators, like I said before, but in 1824, all the states besides South Carolina allowed a popular vote. So, voter turnout skyrocketed, going from 27% in 1800 to about 50% in 1828. This is the year that Jackson won the presidency. Then, it's a huge number, 80% 1840. You're asking yourself, what's the percent today voter turnout? Nowhere near 80%. End of the era of good feelings. Good feelings. Politicians got along. New idea. Okay, not like today. Politicians do not get along. Remember, almost everyone's a Democrat, Republican, 1820, 1824. All of a sudden, Andrew Jackson's pretty upset. He does not agree with all of the Federalist agenda that is going on. He is very anti-Federalist. He ends up winning the election of 1828 with support of the common man who supported his agenda. This was one of the first elections that used a lot of negative criticism of the opponent. For example, supporters of Jackson called Adams wasteful, his American system. Why are we spending federal money on building roads and canals when it should be a state issue? They also believed he was a supporter of the elites. Your daddy is the second president of the United States, you grew up in wealth, you grew up in the Northeast. The common man did not like the elites. They thought the system was rigged for them. On the other side, supporters of Adams called Jackson a murderer. In the War of 1812, he killed a lot of Native Americans. There was also a small instance where he killed some of his soldiers. This story was blown out of proportion, where in reality, he killed a couple of deserters. Also, other criticisms, the Coffin Handbill. He vetoed a lot of bills while in office. Also, there was claims that his wife was a bigamist, which means that she sleeps with a lot of people. In reality, she divorced her first husband. Wow, a divorce. Crazy idea back then, seems almost normal today. She was so distraught about this claim that she actually died. Okay, so imagine someone like Melania dying because someone's calling her rude names. Okay, that is exactly what happened to his wife. And clearly Jackson was very upset by this.
Huge.
Let's talk about Andrew Jackson's presidency. Like I said, he was popular from being in the military. He believed in equal protection under the law. This idea gained a lot of support from the average person. As we're going to see in a later lecture when we get back from school, talking about the market revolution and the Supreme Court, he did not want monopolies. Monopolies were businesses who had complete control of the market. He believed that monopolies should not be allowed. That is an elite idea. He says people should be protected by these businesses that are growing too large. Also, he had a large following from the people in the Southwest and the West. The rural communities loved Jackson. Okay, these people still want less government in their lives. And Jackson is an anti-federalist. He also furthered the spoil system. We're going to see this word come up later. The spoil system is where you become president. When you're president, you have the duty of hiring people in the government. So your Secretary of State, which we talked about, Secretary of Treasury, even jobs below them. So Jackson was one of the first ones to, quote-unquote, abuse this system by putting people into office who were reportedly less intelligent, but gave him more support. King Andrew I. What I want you to do, I want all of you to pause this video. I want you to look through your notes. You should know most of these terms. Go through these terms like we did in class. Underline them as red or blue. Again, red would be an anti-federalist action, while blue would be a federalist action. I apologize, that's reverse. Red would be federalist, blue would be anti-federalist. After you review these terms, rank Jackson from 1 to 10. Again, 1 being very federalist, 10 being very anti-federalist. So please take a moment to pause the video to do that. Moving on. Election of 1836. We saw a huge shift in politics in this election. This is after Jackson's presidency. Jackson's presidency convinced people that a two-party system was needed. A lot of you missed this question on the reading quiz. People believed that two parties, just like two branches of government, keep each other in balance. They check on their political ideologies. So one being very federalist, one being very anti-federalist. Keep each other in check. Air of good feelings is all great and dandy, but people were nervous that one party would have complete control. That's not really democracy. Okay? So, in this election, you have Van Buren winning, and he was Andrew Jackson's right-hand man. As you can see, you have a lot of different candidates that oppose Van Buren. All of these people were considered Whigs. This is the time period when a new party is being created, after the election of Van Buren. These people are all Federalists. These Whigs, who essentially created their own party to oppose Jackson and his anti-federalist agenda, could not pick or select one leader, which led to their downfall. As you can see, a lot of their votes were separated. And like I said before, Van Buren, hand-selected by Jackson, won the presidency. We are going to talk more about Van Buren's presidency in the lecture next week, because during his presidency we have the Panic of 1837. We also have a lot of controversy with the National Bank. So we're going to take some time to go deeper into these topics. Next important change in political theater of the United States is the election of William Henry Harrison. He was on record when he won the election as giving the longest inaugural speech. Definite myth that he died from this long speech. Decided not to wear a jacket. He thought he was all cool. Figuratively and literally, by not wearing a jacket while giving this speech, he came down with a cold a couple weeks later, eventually died of pneumonia. Shortest presidency ever. He died a month into the election, eventually leading to his vice president, John Tyler, which we'll get to in a second. This term is very important. What was the log cabin campaign? It was a campaign done by the Whigs and Harrison. They attempted to garnish the votes of the common man, someone who lives in a rural community, who lives in a log cabin. But you might be thinking, well, Mr. O'Donnell, that's kind of hypocritical. And you're definitely right if you're having those feelings. Because the Whigs are a Federalist party. They agree with bigger government. They agree with the ruling class. But they're trying to appeal to the common voter. Take a second and think why they want to do that. Your answer to that question leads into this one. How did this campaign demonstrate a shift towards modern politics? Modern politics, both parties want to garnish support from the common man, even though they had very Federalist ideas which did not appeal to the common person. The Whig Party, in their individual campaigns, let's say, Ohio, to Sherrard, Illinois, to a rural community in Alabama. Okay, they're appealing to these individuals, but nationally they have a Federalist agenda. What was the fallout of Harrison's death? Harrison was a Whig. Finally, the Whigs win. The end of the terror of Jackson, the end of the terror of Van Buren, and he started throwing presidents. But like I said, he died a month into office. Ironically, John Tyler was a Democrat. So even though he's under the name of the Whig Party, he's very anti-Federalist, which makes Clay and all his Federalists furious. They finally won, but in reality, they actually lose. Okay, now we are going to move on to the next portion of the lecture. This is talking about slavery, and this is dealing with your Stacy and Heller assignments. First, we're going to start talking about the background of slavery. Oh, Mr. Welch.
No.
Nice of you to join us.
Oh, sorry, my bad. I've been busy. Been saving the world one day at a time, 1 second at a time. However it is, we save the world. Okay, so you've got some dueling sources about slavery. We've touched on it. We've talked about it a little bit throughout the time periods. Obviously, time period 3, where we become a country, we establish the Constitution, and we make some rules about slavery. Okay, some rules that will be changed, some rules that will be obviously. We're really starting to look at when this becomes an issue. Obviously, we have that background knowledge or understanding that the Civil War is coming, and that's what this is going to lead us into as a class. So, slavery's been going on since the 1600s or the 17th century, whatever historical information you like to share. But in the 1800s and late 1700s, we see the growth of slavery. And the reason for this is the introduction of the cotton gin, produced by Eli Whitney. What a great guy. And the cotton gin enables expansion of cotton and textile industries in the USA. So, thinking about, you can, produce cotton, but what can you do with that cotton and in terms of creating textiles, creating clothing, and then, well, people like it, they want to buy it, well, can we produce it at a faster rate? Now that's what the cotton gin's done for us. It's increased our manufacturing. This is an association with the industrialization of the Northeast. So the cotton is grown in the South. It's sent to the Northeast, where it's manufactured into a final product, and then it's sold overseas and within the United States. So as this cotton becomes more of a commodity, the demand goes up, the supply is going to slowly rise as well. Also, as a result of this, we almost see the decrease of tobacco plantations. And what you're going to see in the Old Southwest, and Thomas Jefferson's idea of an agrarian society. Well, every individual has the right to own their own farm and grow their own product. Well, what we see as a result of the cotton gin is it's not the individual raising their own farm and growing their own product. It's actually large plantations. So it's almost a commercial product where the very wealthy are the ones in control and everyone else works underneath them. Or you can have your own farm, but you're only producing a small amount and you're not making it for a profit. And usually it wasn't cotton. So you're going to see this come up, and it's going to be an issue over time. We talk about the Old Southwest, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. This is where that agrarian society was considered to be ideal after the Louisiana Purchase and the expansion of the United States. But as I mentioned, that doesn't happen. So Thomas Jefferson's idea of an ideal society, that agrarian society, doesn't manifest itself. So we talk about economically, as I mentioned before, why do people in the North, although there are groups that are against slavery in the early 1800s as we go forward in late 1700s, the reason why you don't see more people against it and the government doesn't do anything about it is because both regions were benefiting from it. The Northeast became industrialized in a manufacturing giant because of the increased availability of cotton. So it's one of those things where, yeah, we don't like it, but in reality it's benefiting me, so why am I going to stop something if it's putting money in my pocket? So you look at that connection between the North and South. South has the slaves, the merchants make the money shipping the slaves, Northern investors and banks make money funding plantations, people wanting to expand their territory, and some even insured slaves because it was considered property. So again, another example of how is this benefiting a bunch of people. And then the profitability of King Cotton, which becomes the dominant product, takes away money from where other investments could occur, particularly transportation and the development of the railroads. Side note, that's going to impact the South down the road in the Civil War, whereas the North, they invest a bunch of money in transportation, which benefits the Union. So, because of this, the South is mostly rural, okay? Especially in the Old Southwest. Aside from St. Louis and New Orleans, not many large cities exist in the Old Southwest. Mostly desolate, low population areas down there in the South. Okay, so the next thing is we talked a little bit, I mentioned about justifying slavery. Why doesn't anyone in the North say anything, aside from small percentage of the population? And there's a justification of slavery. Our third president, and obviously an important founder, I use this quote here as he states in a writing, "As it is, we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is on one scale and self-preservation in the other." So what Thomas Jefferson is basically saying is, if in order for us to be successful, it's almost too late to change. Slavery is that essential component for the success of the South. Yeah, on one end it would be good, to let them go. But on the other end, would that benefit us? And they really don't find that that's a true benefit for them. Again, I tell my classes all the time, and anyone who's had me has heard this. At the end of the day, what drives people? Money. Okay? And slaves were money. And then they weren't necessarily directly, but indirectly, they were providing money and putting money into people's pockets. And Thomas Jefferson, another quote is, "It's a necessary evil." It's not good, but it is what it is. That's how they kind of look at it. Leads me to John C. Calhoun. You're going to read him in Stacy and Helen. And he's got a very, very interesting argument about slavery and how it's good for slaves. And how slaves in the South lived a better life than a free man working in a factory and living in a city in the North. Bold strategy, Cotton. Obviously it didn't pay off. And the reason why we bring this up is, Stacy and Heller asked you to synthesize information. Synthesizing information is taking all of it together and processing it and trying to make a claim. So we got Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, on one end, justice would say, let's free the slaves, but on the other end, we need to preserve our economy. Where John Calhoun says, they live amazing lives. It's incredible. It's incredible. Their lives are incredible. Yeah, right. That leads me to the next point. Referring to the Bible, the Greeks, and racism. So, there is a group of anti-abolitionists who are going to make an argument that slavery goes against the Bible. That same argument is going to be presented on the flip side. They're going to say that slavery is justified in the Bible. So there's this thing called the DeBrow's Review, which was a newspaper published for, I think, around 1840s, all the way until 1884, so about 40 years or so. And an anonymous source wrote a letter justifying slavery as written in the Bible, saying that just like the abolitionists argue that slavery is morally wrong, the Bible states the opposite. Slavery is justified in the Bible multiple times. They refer to Genesis and Abraham having male and female servants, which they translate to be slaves. And they also state in this that in the Bible, all parts of the world throughout the course of time, people have been subjugates of others. Well, if they do it, why can't we? Sounds like something you guys like to say. Well, Mr. O'Donnell's class did this, so why can't we do that? Well, it doesn't always how it works. An example of that would be the Greeks, right? The Greeks had slaves. The Romans had slaves. There's a lot of people, if you study the history of the world, that enslaved others at some point in time. So the U.S. almost used that as one of their arguments. They do use that as one of their arguments. Supporters of slavery saying, well, others did it, why can't we? And then racism. That's obvious in itself. Some people just considered people of color to be inferior. The white man's burden. It's our job to do what we do and subjugate them and control them and whatever it is, that's how it should be. And then this is another quote from DeBrow's Review. we think we can show that the Bible teaches clearly and conclusively that the holding of slaves is right. And there are specific excerpts from Genesis. We won't get into those, but just to give you an idea of how that argument formulates. So, we're going to talk a little bit about slavery and the expansion of the United States. I'm going to split this up between myself and the Red Lion, also known as Mr. O'Donnell. You are not to call him that. And there's some things we're going to get into now, and there's some things we're going to hold off for later because the next time period really delves into this. And you got to understand that there's going to be an overlap as we go, because there's some thematic things that maybe are addressed a little bit in this time period 4, but they're going to be addressed more in time period 5, which does surround itself around slavery and the Civil War. So we talk about the key concepts in your concept maps, okay? And we talk about key concept 4.1. By the 1820s and 1830s, new political parties arose. The Democrats, which we talked about, Andrew Jackson, the Whigs, Henry Clay, disagree about the roles and the powers of federal government in issues such as the bank, tariffs, and federally funded internal improvements. Which you take that a step further into another key concept here. Regional interests often trump national concerns as the basis for many political leaders' positions on slavery and economic policy. We just talked about how, yeah, the Northeast might have had more people against slavery, but they were benefiting from it. So it's going to be more regional based than national based in that regard. Okay. Now, we talk about another key concept, 4.3, 2A and 2C. As over-cultivation depleted arable land in the southeast, slaveholders began relocating their plantations to more fertile lands west of the Appalachians, where the institution of slavery continued to grow. We talk about the Old Southwest. Now the Southwest is Arizona, New Mexico. The Old Southwest being Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. The lands in Georgia and South Carolina, they've been farming on those for a long time. The soil quality tends to go down. More land available, more land to purchase. We see these large rise of plantations. Congressional attempts at political compromise, such as the Missouri Compromise. We talk about expansion, the role of slavery. What role is it going to play? Only temporarily stemmed growing tensions between opponents and defenders of slavery. We're going to get in a little bit about this. They do a nice job of making both sides happy. Okay? Both sides happy in terms of their influence on the federal government. So an example that, I don't know, Mr. O'Donnell made up, and I think it's a good one, is that the era of expansion is like a tick on a baby animal. I want you to think about this simile. So if you don't know anything about a tick, it latches on, right? And you're always supposed to search your dogs for ticks. If you don't really love your dog, so do that. Especially you people who live in shared. Now, those ticks grow. As the dog gets bigger, as it sucks more blood, consumes more blood, the size of the tick grows. So the era of expansion, as we continue to move west, and we've established the Missouri Compromise, and as people continue to Texas, Oregon, as people look to develop more states in the Union, this idea of slavery, the tick is only going to grow and grow and grow. And eventually, it falls off or explodes. And that's essentially what the Civil War does. So we talk about the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So Missouri has the population, they meet the requirements to become a state, they want to join. Awesome, cool. Well, there's a problem. If they join and they want to join as a slave state, that would then mean that the slave states would outnumber the free states. Well, if you're a person from the free state, even though I might be benefiting from slavery, I don't want to lose my influence. Remember, it all comes down to two things, money and power. So they don't want to lose their power, okay, even though slavery is making them money. So the Missouri Compromise is this. If we're going to add Missouri, the free states say, then Maine needs to be added. And there was some controversy with Maine, not only with borders in Britain, but about their role in the Union. So in order to keep everyone happy, we add Maine, we add Missouri, and everything's all good. But it's going to become an issue, as I said, especially with Texas and Oregon. Is it going to be slavery? Is it going to be no slavery? Who should determine whether or not there's slavery in a state? Some people are going to vote, the term you're going to see is popular sovereignty. Let the people who live in that territory determine whether or not they're going to be slavery. And you can imagine how these states might have issue with that. So, the role of the federal government. Less or more? Less government would say let the people choose. More government would say no, we're going to create a strict guideline. This is what policies are going to be, and we're not going to argue about that. Okay? So when we talk about political ideologies and differences as we go, I'm going to flip through these couple maps here. These are political election maps, right? You've seen them before. So blue is Democrats, gold, whatever, mustard is the Whigs. Okay, Harrison wins.